What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Gamecite Chronicles, the console gaming podcast where we sit down each and every week to talk about our favorite hobby, video games. I'm your host, Bondfire, and to the few of you who are actually going to tune in to this first episode, I thank you. I appreciate the support, the love, and the kindness as we venture into this new world of podcasting and really try to, stand something up here. Now, for the uninitiated, which is everyone listening, and somehow if you are listening, you found the podcast, but the podcast is currently available on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, be going up on the Podbean app, as well as YouTube, revitalizing the old YouTube channel, youtube.com/Gamecite. I'll have more on that later in the show, as well as Rumble, the kind of free speech alternative to YouTube. Just search for the Gamecite Chronicles, and we'll be putting the show up there. And then you can also support the show on Locals. So the GamesiteChronicles.locals.com is where you can go join the community, support the show if you'd like. And that's also where I'll be taking questions, comments, thoughts, ideas for the show as we, hopefully cultivate an audience and try to inject you guys into future episodes. You can also follow us on Twitter. So at Gamecite Podcast is where we'll be kind of using Twitter more as an RSS feed. And then you can follow myself on Twitter at Bondfire777. That's BONDFIRE777 on Twitter there as well, where I'm a little bit more active in terms of engagement and posting. And then I also plan on getting the podcast up on a couple of other outlets and social media platforms. So I'm working on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and then maybe setting up a Discord as well for the community over time. So more to come on the social media fronts in the coming weeks. So we've got a pretty big show today. A couple different things I want to talk about. First and foremost, I want to dive into the PlayStation State of Play that happened about roughly 2 weeks ago from the time of this recording, as well as what happened the day after, which is the Ghostwire Tokyo showcase. So I want to dive into both of those, kind of share my thoughts and talk about them. And then last week, at least from the date of this recording, Nintendo dropped a Nintendo Direct. And anytime Nintendo drops one of those, it's big. There's a lot of noise around those. So I want to dive into that, talk about a couple of the games they revealed there. And then for the main topic and the main discussion of the show, I want to dive into the podcast itself, share a little bit about what the podcast will be about, share a little bit of my vision for the podcast, and maybe answer the question why you should tune in. But before we get into that, we got to dive into the first segment, and really it's a staple of any video games podcast, and that is, what games have I been playing? Now, I will say this before I get into that. I want to do something a little bit different with this kind of segment, as we, hopefully grow and cultivate an audience. And that is, I want to inject your answers into that question that you share with the show, with me. And the reason I want to do that is because I just find the answers to that question just so fascinating. A lot of video game websites, and, back in the day, Kotaku used to do this. Currently, Push Square does some form of this. Anytime that question's kind of dropped in the video game sphere, I'm always interested in seeing the answers, because it's so cool to see the sheer variety of games that people are diving into. It's really, really cool. I mean, you'll see games that hit on that nostalgia, or that you've played and really enjoyed, and you'll think like, oh yeah, I remember that game, or oh, that game's awesome. You'll see games that maybe you totally forgot about, and ones maybe you've never heard of, and you just think to yourself like, oh, I should go check that out, or oh, I've been meaning to play that. And you even see some people that are just diving into like older generations, like on the 3DS, or even on like the Wii, or the PS2, a PS3 even, and so it's just so cool to see, what people are playing out there, because it reminds you, and at least for me anyways, that there's more out there than just, the top games on Twitch, or what all the content creators or the video games media personalities are playing, or whatever's in kind of that review cycle. There's more to it, and there's a game out there for everybody. It's just kind of a nice reminder. So I want to inject what you guys are playing into the show and bring that into the segment, a few each and every week, and then share what I've been playing. So a couple games that I've been playing here recently. The first one I want to touch on is Death's Door. This little game developed by Acid Nerve, which are the same guys that did Titan Souls. And so if you haven't played Titan Souls, by the way, I highly recommend it. It's a really cool game. It's not very long. I want to say it's like 4 hours if I remember correctly, like 4 to 5, give or take. But it's great. It's pretty fun, and it's got an interesting mechanic because it's a boss rush game where you only have one arrow, and that's how you attack. And so when you shoot that arrow, you've got to go retrieve that arrow, and they kind of rinse and repeat through various boss battles. So it's pretty darn cool. And then Death's Door is actually published by Devolver Digital, and that should kind of tell you most of what you need to know, because Devolver Digital tends to just publish good stuff. Like, just about every game that they put out there is quality. And Death's Door is no exception to that. So what is Death's Door? Death's Door, it's an action-adventure game where you play as a crow who's a reaper and that collects souls. So you kind of go out on a mission, a standard mission, so to speak, where you got to collect a soul. But things don't really go as planned, and that's kind of what sparks you on this adventure. And it's got some light RPG elements, and I think one of the first things you'll notice about the game is this is heavily inspired by Zelda. I mean, it's just obvious. And that's a good thing. I love it. From the camera angle, like, kind of isometric, top-down sort of, to the dungeons, to the combat, to the bosses, to even some of the items and spells that you get. It's very Zelda, and it's awesome. I love it. The game isn't super long either. I played it. I beat it in about 14 hours. I think you can beat it in about 10, but I decided to kind of go for the 100% and get all the collectibles and things like that. And there is a secret ending if you get 100% the game, which is, in my opinion, well worth it. So if you're so inclined, do so and check that out. But it's a great game. I think it's on all the console platforms. It recently came to PlayStation last. I think it's on Switch, definitely on Xbox. I played it on Xbox through Game Pass. So if you're a Game Pass subscriber, it's there waiting for you to dive into. And I highly recommend it. It's just a great game. And then after that, because I was waiting for Dying Light 2 to come out, I decided to hop into Rainbow Six Extraction, and from Ubisoft. And man, so I've never really gotten into Rainbow Six Siege, though I understand its popularity. I get it. It's a good shooter, a tactical shooter, a great multiplayer game that kind of revived itself and has really become its own thing that definitely has a strong fan base. And so I totally understand it. And, there was a very, very brief period a couple years ago where I got into the game and kind of played it regularly just for a little bit, because it's fun. I see the appeal of it, but it's just not my type of game, if that makes sense. And so moving into Rainbow Six Extraction, kind of leading up to that release, I thought to myself, it looks interesting, and I think what enticed me the most is that it's PvE. So it is multiplayer, like a team of 3, you squad up, and then you go and you kind of, it's cooperatively. You go and do on these missions. And I was like, okay, maybe that's something I can get into. Worst case, maybe something I can at least play by myself if I wanted to. And so, I kind of had it on my radar, low on the list, albeit, but it was on my radar. And then I found out it was coming to Game Pass. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. I'll try it then. So, I started out right when it came out. I hopped into like the VR training that kind of introduces you to the game, the mechanics, and, kind of the mission structure. And then I put it down because then I hopped into Death's Door. And then coming back to it, I decided to do a couple quick play matches, and I didn't have a microphone or anything. I just wanted to hop in, just casually play it. And we got worked pretty good. And then I was like, you know what? Screw quick play. I'm going to dive into single player. I'm going to try to do these missions by myself. And so I did that, and I actually had a pretty good experience on that. Because I could play the game at my pace. I can kind of sneak around. You definitely want to be more stealthy in this game. That's an element of it. And I had a good time with it, for the couple matches or couple missions I did. But I understand the game's criticism. I think this game got a lot of criticism from reviewers in the sense that it's not very deep. It's very repetitive. There's not a ton of content here. And this very well could have just been like a Rainbow Six Siege expansion. And from what I've seen and played, I wholeheartedly agree. But nonetheless, I did want to call it out. I tried it out. And I'm not much of a multiplayer guy, to be honest. But nonetheless, I had some fun with it. But it was really just an interim game leading up to Dying Light 2. And that's the other one, the game I've been playing mostly here lately. is Dying Light 2. This game came out February 4th, 2022. So close to 2 weeks ago, I guess, from when I recorded this. And this is developed and published by Techland. And I got to say, I was very excited going into this. I love the first Dying Light. And if you haven't played the first Dying Light, I highly recommend it. It is a fantastic game. Honestly, one of the best games of the last generation. And I mean that even with all the heavy hitters around PlayStation. It's so good. The parkour is awesome. The melee combat's great. And it's just, the mechanics are awesome. It's just a really fun game to play from a gameplay perspective. And so I've been very excited for Dying Light 2. And it's crazy because Dying Light, the first game came out in 2015. I think it was early 2015, if I recall. And so with Dying Light 2, it's been 7 years. This game has been in development for approximately 7 years. And that's a long time. And I know it had some development woes, some development troubles. So, I've been eager for this game. And now it's here. And I've been playing it. I've probably put in 15 plus hours, into it since I've been playing it the last, give or take 2 weeks, more like a week and a half. And there's some things that I like about it and quite a few things that I don't. And it's, as I've played more, the things that I don't like, I've kind of gotten used to. But let's start there with a couple things that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way as I dove into this game. The first is weapon degradation. So if you play Dying Light and Dead Island, which I forgot to mention this, I love Dead Island. Techland also made Dead Island. That was the game that came before Dying Light. And I know not a lot of people like that game, at least from what I can tell. And I think I'm in the minority here, but I loved it. I played it on the 360 and I put in quite a few hours and I just really enjoyed my time with that game. It was a lot of fun. So I, obviously excited to go into Dying Light 2 because I liked the previous game, and then, obviously excited to go into Dying Light 3. But weapon degradation has been kind of a staple in the games, but in Dying Light 2, you can't repair your weapons. Well, you can. The game doesn't explain it. You can only repair your weapons through weapon modifications. And that's not ever really explained in the game, which is annoying. And then I actually looked this up because I was like, I don't remember this mechanic from the first Dying Light. And in Dying Light 1, you can repair your weapons just a limited number of times. And that was carried over from Dead Island, which is fine. I like that. But in this game, you can't. And so early on, I felt like, I get a good weapon and I was like, I don't want to use this because I don't want it to degrade and then I just lose it forever. Even though I know I'll get better weapons down the road, but it's all about kind of the cycling of weapons and things like that. And I will say it does get better as you get more weapons and more powerful weapons. They tend to last longer. So it just was kind of a minor gripe in the early game. Though I still wish you could just straight up repair the weapons. Because if you modify this cool weapon, you find a unique, or I guess it'd be like a legendary colored weapon, you want to keep it and you want to use it. So I'm not a big fan of weapon degradation, especially it just kind of reminded me of Breath of the Wild and how they handled that. I'm not a fan. And that kind of leads me into the next thing I'm disliking in this game so far is weapon modifications. Just very little explanation from it as it relates to it. And I remember this being more prominent in Dying Light, the first game, in modifying your weapons and just making some really crazy shit, like a blowtorch at the end of a walking stick, or doing some sort of electrical attachment to make your sword electric. And it was awesome. That was a huge part of the game. And I just really kind of feel like it's an afterthought here in this second game. It just doesn't seem as good as the first game. And maybe I just have the rose tinted glasses when it comes to the first game in terms of this mechanic, but I just remember it being better in the previous game. Another thing is this game is obviously heavier on the RPG elements compared to the first game. Now the first game it's an open world game. There's RPG mechanics. You do side quests, the main quest, you level up, and all that stuff. So that's not new, but it's shifted to where it's clearly more of an RPG than it was in the first game. I mean, in terms of your side quests, in terms of just the mechanics and way I don't know, just the way the game feels. It's very, very more role playing game and less horror from what I remembered of the first game. And looking it up, I actually pulled up the wiki for Dying Light 1 because I was curious. And Dying Light 1 is slated as a survival horror game. And that's what I liked about it. Where Dying Light 2 is actually an action RPG. That's how these games are defined. And so it's clear. Like they clearly went in a different direction. In my opinion, not for the better. Not to say that the RPG mechanics are bad or this game is, that bad. It's not by any means, but I prefer the survival horror element because like Dying Light, the first game, they had the day-night cycle, and that was one of the big mechanics that they preached for this game. And, when nighttime would roll around in the first game, like you got terrified in the early game. Like you don't want to be out at night because the zombies get stronger, bigger zombies come out, you get chased, and it's terrifying. And I loved that. That was so cool. And then moving into Dying Light 2, it's not that. Like nighttime happens and it's not that scary. The kind of the horror elements of the game have kind of gone away. And it's interesting because in a lot of ways, Dying Light 2 reminds me more of The Walking Dead than Dying Light 1 does, being like a horror game. Because in Dying Light 2, you interact more with people. It's more about the people in the game trying to survive this apocalypse and kind of being isolated from the rest of the world and all of this stuff. So it's just, I don't know, it's really interesting. It's different from the first game in those ways. And speaking of the nighttime mechanics, that's changed quite a bit in Dying Light 2. And I'm not the biggest fan of them, to be honest with you. I don't think it's really spoilery, but the main thing with nighttime is that, everyone's been infected. And so if you spend too much time in the dark, so to speak, you actually turn into a zombie. Whereas UV light actually deters you from turning into a zombie. And so when you're out at night, if you're not under like UV light, you have a time limit in which you can go out and do things. And it's just kind of annoying. And as you level up and kind of progress your character, that time is expanded. You have more time to go do stuff. And, there's, some items and stuff you can use to kind of refill that meter. But I'm not a big fan of it. The thing with Dying Light 1 is nighttime was a terrifying time to be out. And anytime it was like this risk reward where if you go out at night, you're risking getting destroyed by super powerful zombies to try to do whatever you need to do. Whereas in Dying Light 2, you're just kind of fighting against a timer. And there's not necessarily more zombies or they're more powerful. You're just fighting against a timer to do whatever you need to do. And I don't know. It's just, I'm not a big fan. I liked the survival horror mechanic more than this kind of more action RPG style. I just thought it worked better and played with the mechanics better. So the last thing I've encountered is a couple bugs. So like controller prompt bugs, like I couldn't pull up the start menu till I restarted the game. Like for some reason the start button just wasn't working. Like I couldn't pull up the menu. And it's not my controller, I can tell you that. And then I had to restart the game the other day because I got stuck. Like I was parkouring through an environment and I got stuck in it and I couldn't get out of it. So a couple minor bugs, nothing major. I've seen some frame drops and stuff like that here and there. I am playing on the PS5. I'm playing the PS5 version. But, outside of those minor gripes, which I say I've kind of gotten used to and it's not as bad as you progress through the game, but I'm enjoying my time with it because I'm really interested to see where the story goes. And I actually just played a couple of the story beats in the main quest here that I'm like, okay, this is getting good in terms of the story and seeing where it goes. And so I'm excited to see how it plays out. They've really been talking up the decision-making factors in the game. Like you kind of you can side with, some factions and apparently your decisions affect the outcome of the game and in those types of things. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out and kind of go through the rest of the main story. So I'll have more to say in the coming weeks as I continue to play through this game. As I record this podcast, we're on the eve of the release of Horizon Forbidden West. As soon as I pick that game up, I'll be putting Dying Light 2 down and playing Horizon, because I'm very much looking forward to that game. I mean, dude, February is just jam-packed with games. I mean, let's see, we got Dying Light 2, we got Horizon. Week after that is Elden Ring, which is like one of the most anticipated games for so many people, myself included, for 2022. I know for Destiny fans out there, the Witch Queen expansion, I think, comes out this week, at least at the time of this recording. I know there's been some other kind of smaller games coming out, like Sifu, that the martial arts fighting game came on the PlayStation, looks pretty cool. Last month, I know the new Pokemon game came out on Switch. So, I mean, it's just like there's so many games coming out. Like it's so hard to keep up, but it's a good time to be playing the video games. But that's what I've been playing. So let me know what you guys have been playing, and we'll get those into next week's show. So with that out of the way, I want to dive into this first state of play, the PlayStation state of play that happened a couple weeks ago. And it was all about Gran Turismo 7. And in this one, they showed off gameplay. They talked about a wide variety of the game modes and kind of explained what the game has to offer. And the game launches March 4th, 2022. So, a couple weeks away, which is pretty exciting for racing fans out there. And before I dive into that, I want to preface this as I take a sip of my beverage here. I want to preface that I'm not a big race car fan. I'm not a big racing game fan. I'm not a big car guy or anything like that. I've just never really gotten into these games. They've never like grabbed me outside of one during the early Xbox 360 days, which is Project Gotham Racing 3, which that game was all about drifting and racing and play it with some friends, and I loved that game. It was a really good time. But that outside of that game, man, there's been really no games that I've racing games that I've gotten into, and I've never really played a Gran Turismo game outside of, I think it was late middle school, early high school, playing Gran Turismo, I think 2 or 3 with one of my best friends. Because he was super into cars, and he played Gran Turismo on the PS2. So it was way back in the day. And that's really my only exposure to the Gran Turismo series. It's kind of a series that, I've been interested in more so as of late, but, just never really spoke to me and I've never gotten into. But nonetheless, I did tune into the state of play because I was curious, and the game does look cool. So a couple of things they talked through and showed off during the state of play. So they showed off this music rally mode, which is basically where you kind of, in an arcade style like format, drive through checkpoints, kind of learning the mechanics, learning how to drive cars, while just listening to music. It's kind of cool there. Then they showed off Brand Central, and this is where you buy cars. There's also a used car dealer. You can buy, sell cars, that stuff. And one of the things I didn't know, and I'm sure you'll let me know, but there's an entire economy for buying and selling cars. Like used car prices can fluctuate based on, market values and things like that. And so there's this whole economy within the game that I just find fascinating. And again, I don't know if this is particularly new or unique to Gran Turismo 7, but when they were showing it off and they talked about it, I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, you could basically buy and sell cars and make money in the game and stuff like that. And so it's kind of cool. I think that's really neat. And they showed off the cafe, and this is kind of where you collect challenges, do progression activities and things like that for unlockables. But the other thing they showed off within the cafe is that there's basically books where you can learn about the history and interact with the history of all these cars, these manufacturers and various cars and things like that. And I thought that's pretty cool. So again, that doesn't appeal to me or really speak to me much, but I do think it's very cool. Because if you're super into cars or just a car fan in general, this is awesome. You get to learn about this stuff, and that's, I don't know. I just thought that was really neat that it just really shows that how much love and care kind of goes into that. And there's the license center and the tuning shop. I think those are pretty staples to the franchise. But they also showed off dynamic weather. Dynamic weather isn't necessarily new to racing, but I think they also mentioned, kind of tying it to real world weather in these various locations. And I don't know, it just looked super impressive. I thought it was really interesting. And then they mentioned over 400 cars at launch with 34 locations and over 97 track layouts. So I don't know. I mentioned those numbers just because it seems like there's a ton of content here. Like that's a lot to launch with. And they'll be adding more stuff, post-launch. And so overall, I gotta say, I think the game looks great. The more I see of it, the more I'm like, this looks pretty cool. But I gotta say it's overwhelming. Like the sheer amount of game modes, the various customizability, the amount of content and different things you can really just get super nerdy about in this game is very intimidating and very overwhelming. And since I don't know much about Gran Turismo, I ask you, the audience, the question. So if any of you out there know, I'm curious, can this game be casually played? Like, I'm not going to be one that's going to be like tuning up my cars or like just spending hundreds of hours in this game, but I kind of want to dive into it, try it out. So like, can I casually just come and go into this game, do some races and, buy some cars? Let me know. I honest question. I don't know. Oh, the last thing I want to touch on too, they showed off the photo mode, and I got to give credit to PlayStation. Photo mode is not unique to to video games, especially in this more modern era. But PlayStation and all their first party games, that's like a staple, and they do a lot of cool things with it. And so they showed off some of the photo mode in Gran Turismo 7, and it looks awesome. Like you can take your car to all these real world locations, add crazy effects, and a couple that they showed off was just really, really cool. And shout out to all the kind of video game photographers out there that do just amazing stuff with in-game photography. It's really cool, and so I imagine this game will be no exception to that. And so after that, the very next day, Bethesda announced they're doing a Ghostwire Tokyo showcase. And before I dive into this, I just think it's so weird, and it's still hard to kind of comprehend that Bethesda is a Xbox owned studio, like first party studio, that is making a PlayStation exclusive game. Now I know there's like it's a 1-year exclusivity deal, if I'm not mistaken. And so it'll eventually come to Xbox, but it's just weird. It's like wild times we live in, dude. And then you've got, actually we'll dive into this a little bit, but PlayStation's first party studio is making a game that's on Xbox and also coming to the Switch. So wild times, man. Just a weird time to be in video games. But with the Ghostwire Tokyo showcase, it was approximately 20 minutes long, and they showed off, an extended look at the gameplay. And then towards the end of it, did like this, developer interviews and stuff like that. And I didn't really watch the interviews, but I did watch the gameplay. First thing I got to say about the gameplay is that the combat looks kind of funny. And I don't mean that it looks terrible, but if you're just watching this and because it's all like magic based combat in first person, you're just watching like these hands doing, it's like Doctor Strange hands doing all these weird symbols and like throwing like magical ninja stars at these like yokai or Japanese ghosts, enemies. It just looks funny to me. It's like one of those things that like I think it's probably fun to play, but not fun to watch, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. I'm watching this and I'm like, this just kind of looks funny, but maybe it's just me. I don't know. I digress there. But in the gameplay, as I mentioned, they showed off combat. It's magic based abilities, and there are some pretty cool ones at that. So you do get a variety of those. And they also mentioned you get some traditional weapons as well. Specifically, they showed off a bow and arrow, which is cool. I'm kind of curious what other, more traditional weapons you'll have, maybe like a staff or, katana, swords, stuff like that. I don't know, but that'd be cool. There's a little bit of stealth in terms of like you can sneak around, you can get behind your enemies and stealth kill them, that stuff. And then they showed off some of the world. And one of the things I didn't realize about this game is that it's open world. I did not know that this was an open world game. And I kind of roll my eyes at that because I'm just thinking to myself like, oh, here we go, another open world game. And then they showed off one mechanic in particular, which is around like you go around cleansing shrines, and this kind of clears open the world. And again, it just reminds me of like the Far Cry radio tower trope. It's like, okay, well, that's a thing. This exists, whatever. And then they also showed off a little bit of story, some of the dialogue, and kind of get to know the main character and stuff like that. But, I think this game, I think it looks cool. This is one of the games that I've kind of been up and down on. So when it was first announced, I learned from Tango Gameworks, same guys that brought us The Evil Within 1 and 2. And I loved those games. So I was like, yes, I'm all in. I'm sad it's not The Evil Within 3 because The Evil Within 2 is fantastic. I loved that game. It was a game, as I was playing it, I couldn't put it down. Sorry, had to take another drink there, but I couldn't put the game down. And it was just so good. And so apparently it didn't sell as well as they'd liked, which is probably why we're not getting a third, but I was hoping it'd be a third. But nonetheless, it's Ghostwire Tokyo, different game, new IP, whatever. And then I think it was one of the, following PlayStation showcases or state of plays where they showed off some additional gameplay, and it looked very combat action focused. And I'm like, wait, I thought this was a horror game, but now you're showing me action? I'm confused. And so it kind of turned me off a little bit, and where I'm like, okay, kind of losing interest here. And then moving into this, I'm in actually seeing it play out. I'm a little bit more intrigued than I previously was, but I gotta say, I don't like the shift, because actually in the developer interviews, they talked about that this game is less horror and more action adventure. They actually are consciously making that shift away from, survival horror to action adventure. And just like Dying Light 2, I'm not a fan of that shift. Like you can probably tell I like survival horror games, and I don't feel like we get very many of those today, whereas we get a ton of action adventure games, especially on the PlayStation ecosystem. So I'm not the biggest fan. Like, you're in a horror setting, but it's an action adventure game, let alone an open world action adventure game. So I don't know. It's a game I'll keep my eye on. I think it comes out, March 25th or something like that. Late March is when it comes out. So I'll probably still be playing Elden Ring or Dying Light 2 or Horizon at that time. 3 open world games all in a span of like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Like, there's not enough time, man. But I'll keep my eye on it. I'll see how it reviews, watch some gameplay of it, on Twitch when it comes out, as some people play it, and, maybe pick it up down the road, like maybe summertime. And you know what, actually with Deathloop, the other Bethesda game, PlayStation exclusive that came out last year, that game dropped in price real fast. Like, I want to say within 4 to 6 weeks, it had dropped like 50%. Now, granted, it was close to around Black Friday, but that game's price dropped really, really quick. And so maybe the same will happen here. And if that happens, then sure, I'll pick it up for, $25-$30. Why not? Why not? That's not a bad deal at all for a new game. I'll take it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens when it comes out. But nonetheless, I thought it was a good showcase, and, increased my interest, albeit still low, for the game. Now, next I want to move into the Nintendo Direct. And this happened last week from when we're recording, last Wednesday. And Nintendo Directs are big, man, because they only do a couple of these a year, outside of that one period where we went well over a year, almost a year and a half without a Nintendo Direct. I think it was in 2020-ish. But here we are, 2022, the first Direct. And it's funny with these, because so many people get so hyped up for these, just way hyped, like overhyped. And it's ridiculous, man. Like, people need to temper their expectations, because then everyone bitches and complains about them. They're like, oh, that Direct was horrible, or man, where's Breath of the Wild 2, or where's Metroid Prime 4? Like you have to temper your expectations. And that's one of the things that I think is unique about the games industry, in that, like, the hype level, like, there's hype for movies and things like that, but within games, like, the hype and the marketing machine is just out of control. Seriously, it's wild. And people just need to take a step back and temper your expectations. Like, it's okay to be excited. Don't get me wrong. I'm excited. I love Nintendo. But you have to temper your expectations. And you have to realize that not every direct is going to be about Breath of the Wild 2. Not every direct is going to be about Metroid Prime 4. And not every game in that direct will speak to you. And that's okay. That's okay, people. Not every game speaks to me. But you can take a step back and objectively say whether or not that was a good showcase. You know what I mean? So anyways, I digress about that, but it's fascinating to watch the Nintendo fan base react to these types of things. But I'm not going to go through every game that they announced in the Nintendo Direct, because it was about 40-ish minutes long, and they announced quite a bit. But I'm going to go through a couple of these that really stood out to me. And the first, which happens to be the first game that they showed, which is Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. This comes out June 24th, 2022, and it's a Dynasty Warriors-like game. And I never played Fire Emblem Warriors, and truth be told, I've never been really a fan of these style of games. The only one I've actually tried out is Dragon Quest Warriors, and it just didn't speak to me. It was a little repetitive, and it just didn't really do it for me. And there always seems to be a lack of story, or like a lack of emphasis on the story, which is I'm not a fan of. However, I think that changed with the Hyrule Warriors, I think it's Age of Calamity game that came out fairly recently. I mean, I've always wanted to try that because I know that's more of a story and it kind of acts as a prequel to Breath of the Wild. But nonetheless, we have a new Fire Emblem Warriors game following the Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is a great game, by the way. And I don't know, we'll see how it reviews. Maybe I'll keep an eye on it. I don't know that it's a game I will ever play, to be honest. But it is cool that it exists for Fire Emblem fans out there. And I know these type of warrior style games do fairly well, I'd say. So, and I gotta say the box art looks dope. Looks super dope. But, that's a game that they opened it up with, and I think it was a good opening. Not for me per se, but nonetheless, I'm sure a lot of people were hyped about it. And then after that, they moved into Advanced Wars, which this is the kind of, I guess it's a remake of the old Advanced Wars 1 and 2 games that were on, what was it, Game Boy Advanced, I think is what it is, which is crazy to think about. I've never played those games from back in the day, but the more I see this game, the more I'm like, okay, I kind of want to play these games. And I think it's going to it's a tactical game, so it's going to satisfy this kind of itch I've been having lately for a good strategy kind of tactical style game. That comes out April 8th, 2022, and I don't know, man. I know there's been a little bit of controversy on the art style, because I think it goes from like pixel to more of a slightly different art style, but I think it looks good, and I'm excited to dive into it. I don't know that I'll get it right away when it comes out, but I do plan on picking it up and playing it at some point. Then a couple other games, but they also announced Mario Strikers Battle League. I'm on a podcast and I can't talk. But Mario Strikers Battle League announced, comes out June 10th, 2022, and this is a big game just in the sense that people love Mario Strikers, Mario Soccer. I'm not a big fan of soccer. I'm not a fan of these games. I don't play these games, but they're always big. And that's a big announcement. So, a good win for Nintendo, something to look forward to out in summertime. And then right after that, they moved into Splatoon 3. And this is where I'm like, okay, now you're talking. And they showed off Salmon Run. It's called Salmon Run Next Wave. And then they release windowed Splatoon for summer 2022. And I got to say, I'm hyped. Yes. I'm so excited Splatoon 2, or it's not Splatoon 2, Splatoon 3 rather, is coming out this year. Now, I will say they didn't give an actual release date. It's just a release window of summer 2022. So we'll see if that gets moved out. So they're probably still trying to kind of iron some things out before they can actually announce a release date. But Salmon Run's great, man. So the first Splatoon came out on the Wii U, and I played the crap out of it. I loved it. Splatoon 2 on the Switch is no exception. It's a great multiplayer game. I loved the co-op mode that they added with Salmon Run. So I'm all for Splatoon 3. Sign me up. Yes, please. I'm all about it. My only thing with Splatoon 3 that I hope they do is I hope they improve upon the campaign. I want a little bit more story in the campaign, and we'll see if they deliver that. But Splatoon 3, baby, is coming out, and I'm freaking excited. Then after a slew of other games, they announced one that was kind of long rumored, which is the Chrono Cross remaster called the Radical Dreamers Edition. That comes out April 7th, so actually fairly soon. And I've never played Chrono Cross. This is a game that was been rumored for a while. I think a lot of people love from the PlayStation 1 era. So it's cool to see that it's being remastered to a certain degree, kind of being brought forth to modern consoles. Because I also think it's coming out to PlayStation and Xbox. At least PlayStation, I know for sure. But I gotta say, it does look a little rough. It's not the remake that a lot of folks were hoping it would be. But nonetheless, that game's coming forward, so it's not stranded on that old hardware on the PlayStation 1. So I think that's cool nonetheless. They showed off more of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which comes out March 25th. Again, this game looks good, and I think it will be good, but it's another one of those games where it's like, I'm probably not going to get to it for a while. But, we'll see as time goes on. I'll definitely keep my eye on it. And then this next one, I normally wouldn't talk about it, but I just find it fascinating that it's coming out on the Switch, which is Mlb the Show 22, which comes out April 5th, 2022. And as I mentioned earlier on the podcast, this is a first-party PlayStation game, first-party developed game by PlayStation. It's coming out on the Switch. Now, you'll recall this last year, Mlb the Show came to Xbox and Game Pass, which is fascinating. And now it's coming to the Switch. So it's pretty cool just to kind of think about that, just from that standpoint. They showed it running on the Switch. It doesn't look like it's running that well. But hey, it's the Switch. I mean, you can play Mlb the Show portably, which is kind of cool just in and of itself. So don't expect much from a performance standpoint, but you're playing it portably, which is cool. Then moving along, this next one is bigger than I realized as I started to look into it more, and that's Live. And this is apparently the first ever Western release of this game. It was previously released in Japan. I think it was 1996. Hold on, I'm actually going to look this up because I was very curious. Let's see. Live. Okay, first released in 1994. So that's a long time ago. And, as I'm watching this, seeing the gameplay, they're showing all these different characters, all these different kind of themes, and I don't really know what I'm looking at here. And so it didn't really speak to me as I watched it. But then, someone on Twitter, I think it was, one of the games journalists or some insider, inside the industry, talked about how important this game is, not only with it being the first ever coming to the West, but how unique this game is in the sense that it's 8 different protagonists, which apparently are all done by different artists or, writers, I think is what he said. And that it all kind of comes together in the end, which makes this game really unique and worthwhile. And so I'm actually going to read a little bit of kind of the synopsis about the game. So Live is a role-playing video game in which the player takes on the role of 8 different protagonists through 9 scenarios. While each narrative has the same basic mechanics, individual stories have unique gimmicks. These include the use of stealth, the lack of standard abilities, or using telepathy to learn new facts to progress the narrative. With the exception of one scenario, the player character navigates themed environments ranging from the overworld to area to dungeon environments. Battles are triggered differently for each scenario. Some are random encounters. Enemy sprites can be avoided or entirely scripted. And so just learning more about this game has really turned me on to it. And I am now super excited for it. It's going to be a day one pickup for me. I want to see the story. I want to know how all these things tie together because there's like a Western theme. There's like a ninja theme. There's like a medieval theme, a space theme. Like there's all these different time periods that are apparently all going to clash together at the end. And I want to know how this is done. So I am absolutely fascinated by this game. I'm going to pick it up when it comes out, and I highly recommend you keep your eye on it. So super excited about that. And then they announced a Mario Kart 8 Booster Course Pass, which at first I was like, oh, they're going to announce Mario Kart 9. Like this is happening, a new Mario Kart game. But it ended up just being they're bringing past Mario Kart courses over to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And just the sound of that isn't enticing, but it's 48 total courses that are being released. So 8 over 6 waves. And that's pretty impressive. I got to say, I'll give them credit. That's pretty impressive. So if you're a Mario Kart fan out there, look forward to that. And then they ended the show with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 coming out September 2022. Not a hard release date, so we'll see if they actually hit that. Well, only time will tell on that, but it looks cool. I gotta say, I've never played a Xenoblade Chronicles game. I never played the first one when it came out on Wii and then 3DS. And then on the Switch, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 came out. I eventually picked it up. And then I was excited because they did the remaster of Xenoblade Chronicles and brought that over to Switch, the first one. And I've played maybe an hour of it. I started it basically, but I've never played through these games entirely. And I've heard nothing but good things about Xenoblade 1 and 2. And I really want to play them. I really, really do. I eventually will get to them, hopefully at some point. But they're one of those games that I know they're massive games, like they're long games, and I know there's a ton of side quests, and that's overwhelming to me. Like my gaming time's fairly limited, and I tend to get distracted with side quests in some games. Like The Witcher 3 was very intimidating to me in the beginning because there's so much you can do in that game. And so with Xenoblade, I want to play it because I know it's good and I've heard great things about them, but I'm intimidated because it's a long game and I'm probably going to get distracted with all these side quests. So let me know. Actually, here's another question for you. Can I just skip the side quests and just play basically the main story in Xenoblade without really missing much? Is that possible? If so, maybe I'll just do that. So let me know. I'm very curious about that. And that's it. That's how they wrapped up the Direct. And I got to say, overall, I think it was a good Direct. There are lots of different games shown off. I think a little bit of something for everyone, and some pretty big hitters coming out. And that was just really the first half of 2022. So that doesn't even showcase what's going to happen in the fall and then for Christmas time. So I think Nintendo's got a big year ahead of them, which is awesome to see. Like they've just maintained full steam ahead with the Switch since it came out back in 2017. And so with that out of the way, I want to move into the main topic, even though we're 40, 50, almost 45 minutes into the podcast, give or take. But that is, I want to talk a little bit about the podcast. So what is the Gamecite Chronicles? And I'll start there. And to answer that question, I feel like I got to give a little bit of background about myself and my time as a content creator doing YouTube and Twitch. So back in the beginning of 2013, which in looking back at retrospective, which is 9 years ago, which is just crazy to think about how time flies. But I started a YouTube channel called Gamecite. And that idea and name really birthed from a separate idea I had, years prior in creating a video game website called Gamecite, where I do reviews and also have a place, like a social platform where gamers can come together and talk about video games. But I didn't have the technical capabilities nor the know-how to pull something like that off. So I decided, let's dive into YouTube. That's a thing. Let's give it a go. Create content there and kind of transform that idea and turn it into a YouTube channel. So I did. And I did YouTube, was creating videos up until about the beginning of 2017. So a little over 4 years. And it's funny because I think my last video that I put up was my Nintendo Switch unboxing, because it was right after the Switch came out that I decided to, step away from YouTube. And about halfway through that is when I got into Twitch. And I kind of went back and forth between live streaming on Twitch and creating videos on YouTube and so on and so forth. And during that tenure, I did a variety of different styles of content. I did, gameplay reviews, obviously. I did lots of gameplay commentaries. I mean, kind of the classic Call of Duty gameplay commentaries about a variety of different topics. I did some Let's Plays. I did a couple of, unique series, like a news series or some, series that are tied to specific video games. And then I also did some vlogs and got into, unboxing videos, which those tend to do to the best and were probably the most fun to make. And, I learned a lot during that time. I met some great people, some that I still keep in touch with today, some other content creators. I learned a lot. I grew, not only from a technical standpoint in terms of like actually making videos, but, just even talking. Like, and I know it sounds weird, but being able to like articulate is a skill that not everyone has. And I saw myself kind of get better at that. And it's kind of funny because now we're moving into podcasting, but nonetheless, and I'm proud of what I did over there. Cause I think, at the peak I amassed, 3,500 subscribers. I had a couple videos that had over 100,000 views. And, while I was not a big channel by any stretch of the imagination, nor did I ever really blow up, I'm happy with it. I had a little corner of the internet that was myself. But I decided to step away, and really towards the end of that, and toggling between YouTube and Twitch. And, actually, before I get into that, I want to say with Twitch, it was one of the things that I really, really enjoyed doing. But Twitch is one of those things where you have to be live. Like when you're live, that's the content. You got to be live. You got to have the time for it. And, because this was just a hobby of mine, I didn't necessarily always have that consistent time slot for it. And, on Twitch, you can't just live stream for an hour or two here and there. Like, you have to be consistent about it. And then that's, one of the keys to growing on that platform. And it just wasn't there for me, fortunately, because I have real life obligations. I had a full-time job and all that stuff. So nonetheless, towards the end of it, I started thinking to myself, like, why am I doing this? Because I wasn't making money off of it. I didn't monetize anything really. And not that I would have probably made much money anyways. It's just a hobby of mine, kind of a creative outlet, and one that started taking up like all of my free time. It's kind of impacting my personal life in some negative ways. Nothing drastic. Let's be clear here. Nothing like drastic to where like my wife left me or, or something crazy like that. But, to the sense that like my energy, all my creative energy was focused on content creation, and all of my free time was dedicated to that. And it impacted my gaming habits in the sense that, where I would normally just kind of chill out on the couch, fire up a game and just kind of, veg out or, escape. Playing games became, okay, let's fire up the Elgato, let's record some gameplay, or let's fire up the cam and let's do some live gameplay, or let's, fire up a stream. Like everything I did was tied to creating content. I mean, I'm sure as a lot of you content creators out there can attest to, that's exhausting and takes a toll on you. And so for me, considering all of that, I was like, let's just call it. Let's, we had a good run, we had some fun, but let's step away. And so I did, and honestly, for the better. I found myself into a good career that I enjoy and am passionate about. I'm a dad now, so things are going good in the personal life, and I can play games now and just relax. Like playing video games for me is an escape, and it's a way to kind of relax and just enjoy myself. And so not having to worry about recording and creating content about that is critical for me. But, and it's a big but, I still have the creative bug. I've always been a creative person my entire life. I always grew up like drawing and creating things, and I've always wanted to, create some sort of business. Actually one of my high school, my big senior project in high school, I actually created a t-shirt company, and I've always wanted to do something like that in the world and say I created that, and just have this creative energy be able to kind of just put somewhere. And so, over the last, I'll say 2-ish years, I've kind of thought to myself, what about starting a podcast? Like, I know it's super late in the game. Everyone has a podcast, and there's, millions of podcasts out there, but why not give it a go? And so I really took, one of the sayings to heart, like there's no better time like the present. That saying, I really took that to heart, and I was like, let's do it. Let's just do it. Let's dive into it. Let's make a podcast. And that's how the idea was born. And so with the name, the Gamecite Chronicles, Gamecite obviously is an extension of my YouTube. I felt like that was a natural extension. Let's use that branding, the existing brand that I've created, and just evolve it into a podcast. And that's where I added Chronicles to it. And I really felt like that was fitting because the definition of Chronicles is a historical account of events arranged in order of time. And I felt like with this podcast, that's perfect because this is my chronicling of my time with gaming. You know, games I've played, my reaction, impressions to news and events as they occur, sharing thoughts and ideas with an audience as it relates to video games and in this hobby that, you know, we're all so passionate about. I felt like that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. And, you know, maybe I've spent a little too much time thinking about this stuff, but I just really felt like it worked out really well. And so that's kind of how all of this came to be, and a little bit about, you know, my background with it. And that leads into, you know, what's my vision for the show? And, you know, ultimately it comes down to a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, I want this to be very casual. I want it to be laxed and just kind of a place where, you know, it feels like we're just sitting down and chatting about video games. You know, I mean, I'm literally sitting down talking into a microphone about video games, but I hope that translates through the microphone into your ear holes in a coherent way. But the other thing is this show is specifically about console gaming. So let me be clear about that. I'm a console gamer. I don't play PC games. I have nothing against PC gaming because there's a lot of great PC games out there. I can't do keyboard and mouse, man. All my life I've played with a controller in hand ever since the early Nintendo days. So that's just what I know. It's what I love. And that's what I play. So I'm a console gamer. So we're going to talk about PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox here on this podcast. And the other thing I want to do is inject the audience into the show. So, you know, as we hopefully grow and cultivate an audience, I want to inject your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, ideas, insights into the show. So whether it's, you know, what games you're playing, we talked about that a little bit earlier, or, you know, insights into the topic or questions you may have, like a Q&A type session. I'd love to do some of that stuff. You know, so hopefully we can get there. I want to inject that into the podcast and make it as interactive as you know, this medium of podcasting can be. And then I touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is a creative outlet for me. You know, I'm looking to create something to be able to kind of have an outlet to talk about this passion of mine, which is video games. I love it. It's a huge part of my life. I spend a lot of time and a lot of money on this hobby, and it's something I'm super passionate about. I'm very interested in, and I keep up with the news and all that stuff. So it's an outlet for me. And, you know, one of the things I would like to eventually get into is interviews, you know, having guests on the show. I don't know if I'll ever reach a point where I get a co-host, but I'd love to have guests, have conversations on the show with some folks and just kind of explore some of the different areas around there, not only around, you know, gaming, but content creation and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I foresee the show going, and kind of what I hope transposes as the show kind of takes off, you know, from this first episode. And one of the things I wanted to touch on too, that it's important for me is, and I think will be, you know, somewhat unique, is that I want to maintain kind of an outside the industry perspective. And so what do I mean by that? And what I mean is that, you know, I don't anticipate, you know, reaching out to devs or, you know, creating these partnerships with developers and publishers, you know, to get early access to games and free games and, you know, do review embargoes and just kind of that whole ecosystem that a lot of, you know, YouTubers, as well as, you know, the traditional games media and video game sites, you know, do and put up with and go through. I'm totally fine and content being kind of outside of that sphere and that bubble, you know, for a couple of reasons, but one of them is I kind of don't want to be a part of the marketing machine and the hype machine that is just so rampant in the games industry. And the other part of it is, you know, for myself, in the content that I consume and enjoy the most is genuine and what I deem authentic. And that's something I really want to maintain and keep on the show, is authenticity. I want to be real. I want to be honest. I want to be open, transparent. And that's important to me. That's having that integrity for me as an individual is super important. And so in anything I create and do, I want to bring that over. That's key. And this touches on a little bit of subject that may go a little off rails, and I may sound like I'm complaining or I'm just some sort of maybe a pessimist of some sort. But, I used to follow a lot of big YouTubers, content creators, Twitch streamers, some, I guess you'd consider high profile media personalities, in the gaming sphere while I was doing YouTube and Twitch. And even afterwards, I continued to follow them. But over the years, I've noticed I've stopped following a lot of them, and I've seen their content kind of transform where it just feels like we're just shilling products at this point. And, that's not to take anything away from taking sponsorship deals, ad deals, any of that stuff, like more power to you, go get that cheddar, as the saying goes. I have no issues with that, but my issues comes with it where when it feels just inauthentic, or like that's the only style of content that you seemingly produce. It's just not my flavor, and that's not something I want here on the show. And that, that's not to say that if I ever reach a point to where we can get sponsorships for the show or anything like that, then that's great. But what I would seek in terms of, sponsorships and any type of products that I would like to promote, I don't feel like I can promote anything I don't believe in. So that's a key component there. Like, I want to believe in the product. I'm not going to just shill something for some money. That's not how I operate for me as an individual. So, hopefully that makes sense. And it just, that it's not to bring any of those folks down or to say that they're doing anything wrong, because they're not. But for me, that's not the style of content I want to do. That's not how I operate. And, I think of an example to just hopefully kind of put it into context and paint a little bit picture here is, I think of some of the ad deals or sponsorship deals that some folks have gotten around, like Hot Pockets. And so they put out some sort of video, or some sort of tweet or Instagram post or something like that, where it's like, when I'm having a long gaming session and I get super hungry, I just go grab a Hot Pocket, pop it in the microwave, and it's done real quick. It tastes great, and I'm right back into the game. And it's like, no, you don't, dude. That is not real. Nobody does that. So I don't believe that. That's just garbage. That is straight shilling a product. And I'm not a fan of that. And that's not something I want to do. That's not how I plan to operate. So, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that comes across the right way. I'm sure I'll you'll let me know if it doesn't, but that's kind of just where I'm coming from when it comes to that stuff. And one of the things they say when you're creating some sort of show or any type of content is you want to create content that you would consume and enjoy. So since I don't enjoy that style of content, I have no intentions of bringing that over here. And, back to my earlier point about kind of maintaining that outside the industry perspective, one of the other things that I feel like will be injected into this show is, me as a person, in the sense that, gaming is a hobby of mine. I've mentioned that several times. It's a passion of mine. And this is not something, sitting in front of a microphone or content creation that I do as a full-time job. I have a actual, I say actual, but, an actual full-time job, in this just sounds bad, but like in the real world, right? I have a real job. I have a family. I'm a dad, which is fairly new and is awesome. It's so cool. And, those things that make up me as a character, I want to inject into the show and potentially touch on some topics as they relate to them. Like, for example, one of the topics I want to do a show about is teaching your kids about video games. Like, how do you introduce, your kids to video games? What's the best way to go about it? What types of games should they be playing? And just kind of touch onto that, because that's something I'm going to be getting into here probably in the next year or so with my son. So it's things like that I hope can be injected into the show and come across through this medium. So again, I hope that all makes sense. Hope that provides you an idea of what to expect here on this podcast. And that reminds me, actually, one thing I do want to touch on in terms of segments and kind of the flow of the show. And I know if you've made it this far on the podcast, thank you. But the flow of the show, at least I anticipate, and what I'm planning on doing is, obviously we'll talk about the games that we're playing. And then each and every week, I imagine there will be a couple of news items to cover. Now, I'm not going to do like in-depth, the top 10 news stories or do big news analysis or expect you to come to the podcast for the news, but rather, take some of the big news items that are relevant to the console gaming space and let's react to them. Let's talk about them. And then, move into kind of a main topic for the show. And I've got quite a few lined up. I already touched on one, but that could be a variety of different things. And, some of the things I'm also thinking about doing is like, most anticipated games or games I'd like to see remastered, some of those list type styles, as well as, more thought-provoking conversation topics like the impact of Game Pass on the industry, or as we've seen with the massive, I still can't believe it's happening, but the crazy acquisition of Activision from Microsoft, as well as PlayStation buying Bungie, the consolidation of the industry, like that's been rampant over the last, I would say, 2 years, with big big companies like your PlayStation, your Xbox buying all these studios. So I think that's a conversation worth having. That's a topic worth diving into. Or another one. Actually, this might be a spoiler alert for next week's episode, but game preservation and backwards compatibility. So I've got these ideas for lots of different topics, and I think there's more than enough content and topics to talk about and bring on the show. So that'll be kind of the flow, and that's how we're going to operate. I'm sure it'll evolve over time, but that's at least how I envision and how I've wanted to put things together. And that's all I've got for you guys today. That's the show. What do we go on for here? Almost an hour, give or take, or over an hour, depending on my timer might be a little off here, but a little bit longer than I anticipated. And I don't have a time limit for the show. I anticipate, depending on the amount of things we need to talk about, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour per episode, or, maybe even longer if we eventually get a guest on or something like that. So that'll do it. That's it for the show. So thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Make sure to follow all the social media channels. But first of all, remember you can support us on Locals, the Gamecite Chronicles.locals.com. That's where the main community will live and breathe and thrive. And that's also where you can submit your questions, comments for the show. And that's where I'll also be posting kind of a question of the week that we can inject into the show. And that'll do it. So again, thank you. And until next time, I'm Bondfire, and I will see you online.